What's up, y'all? Welcome back to The Raging Atheist. I am The Raging Atheist. We just left the Caliphate. We just left Ali in negotiations with Aisha, and it had worked out, and she had conceded that she was just antagonizing an already turbulent situation. And I told you how both armies were conflicted, and they had been conflicted, and now it has turned. Now it has become to the point to where there are factions in both armies that don't feel like negotiations should have taken place, and feel like they wanted a battle. So they staged a battle. One side attacked the other, and before either the Caliph or Aisha knew what was happening, all-out war had broken out. And so there went the negotiations, and here we have our first battle in a civil war in the Islamic State.
However, since the ranks of both armies were infiltrated by the mob participants, during that night, the mob leaders conspired to provoke a situation that would lead to an all-out war. A number of mob participants from both armies crossed over to the opponent's camps. They started burning tents and launched a simultaneous surprise attack. The common soldiers from both sides believed they had been betrayed by the other, and before Ali or Aisha could intervene, an all-out battle had ensued.
Ali defeats Aisha. Ali defeats that army. Ali is a brilliant strategist. But Aisha wasn't the enemy, and he had actually come to terms with Aisha, and those terms held. Aisha withdraws from public life, goes on to become a top scholar of Islam in her time. But the true enemy of Ali was Muawiyah, however you say his name, and the governors that refused to give up power. Now Ali, in essence, is the Bernie Sanders of his time. He's coming into a corrupt oligarchy, and he's trying to strip power from the rich and give it back to the people. But unlike Bernie Sanders, Ali's quite capable and willing to destroy and crush his enemies with bloodshed. So, the analogy only goes so far. But Muawiyah is the real enemy, and this is a snake that has been in politics of the Islamic State for 20 years. He was part of the corruption that honestly led to Uthman's death. This dude he is capable of plots within plots, and he, without realizing it, by plotting, is becoming a victim of a larger plot by the Egyptian delegation that had turned into an angry mob, and will become the birth of Islamic radicalism. Islamic terrorism will become the birth of the suicide bomber. All of that will be in this video.
In the heat of the fight, Aisha rode a camel straight into the battlefield and commanded her troops. From that moment onwards, the battle became known as the Battle of the Camel. Some 10,000 people died from the fighting, but in the end, Aisha was captured and Ali emerged victorious. Ali and Aisha discussed the events and made peace with each other. Aisha returned to Medina and would later on become one of the most distinguished and respected scholars of Islam.
Muawiyah is a savage politician. If Ali is Bernie Sanders, Muawiyah is Mitch McConnell. Muawiyah is nothing but opposition to rule, nothing but defaming the Caliph. And he does that, and he's going to turn the people against the Khalifa. And you have to imagine, this isn't how Ali thought it would be, being passed over 3 times to be the Khalifa of the Islamic State. You have to think that when he finally got it, his power would have been absolute. That just was not the case. And eventually, this would come to a head. Muawiyah will form his own army. The Caliph has his army, and they're going to meet on the field of battle. This is not going to continue to be a political war. This does become an actual civil war, the first civil war of the Islamic State. And it's also going to breed fundamentalist radicalism of the Islamic religion.
In essence, The frontier between Ali and Muawiyah was split along the ancient Byzantine-Persian lines. The governor in the Levant, Muawiyah, used this and manipulated the public opinion. On the final day of the battle, Ali renewed his attack and was gaining a decisive upper hand. The Shiites were crushing the ranks of Muawiyah's army. In a desperate attempt to turn the battle, Muawiyah enforced a new strategy. He had his spearmen attach pages of the Quran to their lance tips and set them marching slowly towards the opponent. The spearmen were followed by Muslim scholars who were reciting Islamic verses. The intimidating strategy worked. Ali's partisans dared not to raise their swords against the holy pages of the Quran.
Now, this is just going to show you what kind of human being Muawiyah is. He's losing this battle. And it is also going to show you how ridiculous religion is. Because he's losing this battle, so his strategy is, hey, let's put pages of the Quran on our spear tips, and let's have our holy men reading from the Quran behind our warriors, and we'll advance on them, and they won't attack us. And that's what happened. That's how the battle went from a decisive victory for Ali to a practical stalemate, because Ali's warriors would not raise their arms against the Quran. Now, and this is how ridiculous religion is, because if you're in the middle of battle and you're so heated about your side of a conflict that you are willing to kill over it, and a page from a book will stop that, that's insane to me. I mean, that's insane to me. That just shows you how ridiculous religion is. You hate this person enough to kill him, but you're not going to kill him if he has a page in his hands. It's stupid, I know, but it really happened. This happened, and this forced a stalemate, and it led to a lot of crazy.
A large portion of the army, roughly 12,000 men, kept a distance from the main body of the army. It was the same group of men who had earlier threatened Ali to hold negotiations. However, now this group was quarreling that Ali had betrayed Islam by agreeing to a truce and that he should have continued to fight.
So now, after this tactic had worked, a large faction of Ali's army basically forces Ali to hold negotiations with Muawiyah. And out of these negotiations, Muawiyah makes crazy demands that Ali will not give in to. But it does create a truce, and this battle is over. And that same faction that had convinced him to hold these negotiations are now pissed off because he didn't continue to fight. So this creates a rift in the army, and they separate themselves, and they're very angry at Ali for this, and it creates a problem.
The commanders argued that they had opposed Muawiyah's rebellion as they considered Ali to be the rightful Caliph. But now they also opposed Ali for accepting to subject his legitimate authority to arbitration. Everything pointed out to a mutiny, but it was in fact much worse than that. This group of mutineers split off and formed their own party called the Khawarji, and later developed into an anarchist movement.
This is the birth of radical fundamentalism in Islam. This is the birth of the terrorism that would engulf the world for the next 1,500 years. This is the birth of the modern-day suicide bomber. This is the birth of the ideology that if you do not believe in Islam, then you are a sinner that needs to be eradicated from the earth. The Khawarji are your primitive members of ISIS, of Al-Qaeda, of Hamas. They are your jihadists that believe the world needs to be Islamic.
What we do know for certain is that they were the very first sect in Islam, the first to leave the mainstream religion. In fact, that is what the name Khawarji means, the ones who left. However, the Khawarji doctrine expanded the realm of war to include every Muslim who did not agree with their view. Thus, it basically meant that the Khawarji were at war with the known world.
Does that sound familiar? Does that not sound like ISIS? This was 1,500 years ago. This was the infancy of Islam still, and it's producing this hatred this disease upon the world. And this is why, if Islam is going to continue to coexist with a ever-changing, ever-evolving world, then Islam itself must be ever-changing and ever-evolving, or it is an ideology that must be eradicated for the sake of every human being on this planet.
For example, the Khawarji agents would merge themselves in a crowded market whilst having their daggers and swords concealed. The Khawarji followers would then plunge their blades into unsuspecting civilians and go on killing until they themselves were killed. It was the predecessor of the suicide bomber, the first form of Islamic terrorism.
Assassin's Creed much?
A few days later, Ali passed away, leaving behind an enormous gap of power, a fractured state, and 2 sons, Hassan and Hussein. Thus, immediately following the death of the 4th Caliph and the 1st Imam, the partisans of Ali looked to his eldest son, Hassan, as the rightful successor and named him the 2nd Imam.
So essentially what happens is this new terrorist group, they plot to create their own Islamic State, to take over the Islamic State and make it their own, based upon their ideology of hatred. So they have a plot that they're going to kill the 3 leaders of Islam, Ali, Muawiyah, and this other guy that had moderated the negotiations between Ali and Muawiyah. So, you know, and this guy had been sick, so he sent one of his aides to prayer that day. So he wasn't there, and the aide got killed. Muawiyah survived his attack and would go on to live. The only person that would die from this attack would be Ali, the 2nd caliph in a row to be murdered by a Muslim, by his own people. And Ali only ruled for about 4 years, a little over 4 years. So, you know, while his reign was short, his legacy lives on today. We still have the splits between the Shiites and the Sunnis, which causes conflict, causes radicalization, causes hatred among Muslims themselves. We still have, to this very day, 1,500 years later, these assassins, these terrorists causing chaos across the world. And that's the whole point of this series, is to discover what happened to Islam. And I think we have discovered it fairly early. And it's fairly easy to see that this is an ideology that just does not work, and it either needs to be abridged or destroyed. As always, I am the Raging Atheist. If you like my videos, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, share me on your social media. I'll see you soon.